before the video starts, viewer discretion is advised. We're going to be talking about some things that might make you queasy or might make your stomach hurt. But yeah, on with the video. Did Jesus Christ survive the crucifixion? Answer: absolutely not. There is no guaranteed way that he survived. You gotta think, crucifixion was not just the death penalty. The way that crucifixion was designed was to make a man suffer. It was designed to kill someone slowly and painfully. Before someone was even nailed to the cross, they were like beaten and broken. Like Jesus, for example, he was so bloody and broken that when he had to carry the beam of the cross or carry the cross to Golgotha, the place of which he was crucified, he was so bloody and broken to the point where he couldn't carry the cross. The Roman soldiers had to seize someone to help Jesus carry the cross. And you gotta think, there were like many different types of crucifixions, but the T one was one that was designed to make someone suffer slowly and painfully. And if you were crucified while you were on the cross, it's kind of hard to explain, but the way your body was positioned made it extremely hard to breathe. Like, for example, the way that Jesus was crucified, where his hands out were like this, the way he was crucified, it put so much pressure against his chest that it made him physically hard to breathe. Like, he was suffocating. And if you wanted to breathe, you had to position your body in a way that pushed your chest outward, which put more pressure on your hands or where they would nail the nails into your hands. So not only were you suffocating, but you were putting more pressure on the parts of your hands of which they crucified them, and this would put you in even more pain. Now, for example, there are some historical records on people being crucified. Like the Jewish historian Josephus would talk about how people were crucified within Jewish wars. Tacitus, a Roman historian, also noted that crucifixion was the most degrading penalty that Rome could give, or it was the most degrading punishment. And if you ever doubt the crucifixion, or there's just the crucifixion in general, or whether or not this actually happened to it, from what we know, crucifixion is a historical fact. This happened to people. And if you're doubting the brutality of the crucifixions, just know that Constantine, remember Constantine, the guy that we talked about, he actually banned crucifixion from how brutal it was. Now, from what we know historically, there were different types of crucifixion. One of them was called crux simplex. So it was basically like someone was crucified on a pole. So instead of your hands being outwards like this or like this, it was like this. Yeah. So your hands would be like this, and you'd be crucified while your hands were above you. Another design of crucifixion was called the crux commissa. This is usually when it describes that Christ died on the cross, it's usually with the depiction of the crux commissa, so like in a T shape. The way the crux commissa was designed was your hands were stretched out. This put a lot of pressure on your chest, and the way you were hanging made it really hard to breathe. Now, there was a difference between nails and ropes. You were either nailed to the cross or you were roped to the cross, like you were tied there. And sometimes people were tied to the cross and they weren't really nailed. Now, I know what you might be thinking. That doesn't really seem as suffering, or that doesn't really seem as painful. Yeah, you're wrong. From what we know, they didn't it was like any other crucifixion. When you were nailed, you would die much more quickly compared to if you were tied to the cross. But from what we know, if you were tied to the cross, you suffered just as much. They didn't feed you, they didn't give you any water, and since you weren't nailed to the cross, that just meant more suffering. Also, nails and ropes, from what we know, they were not separate. Sometimes Roman crucifixions or people would use these together. So they would nail you into your hand and then they would tie your wrists so your limbs didn't rip off. Now, what we know biblically, or kind of from what we can get from the Gospels, we know that Jesus died a nail crucifixion because in the Gospels, Thomas asks if he can put his finger in the holes of which Jesus was crucified. Now, from what we know about historical crucifixion, it wasn't by itself. There were multiple, punishments that led up to that one crucifixion. Like, for example, they would beat you, they would flog you. For those who do not know what being flogged is, it's basically where they take you and they tie you to a pole or something with your back exposed, and they take a whip or a flagrum, and it was sharp, and they would whip and slash out your back until bone was exposed. So from what we can gather from historical crucifixion, when Jesus was crucified, in the Bible, it says he was flogged. So most likely, when Jesus was dying on the cross, his spine was exposed. We don't know for a guaranteed fact that his spine was exposed, but from what we can gather from historical crucifixion, it's very possible that it was. Now, from what we know, the punishment that led up, or the beatings and the floggings that led up to the crucifixion, from what we know about historical crucifixion, the before part leading up to the crucifixion would cause a lot of blood loss. It is literally a miracle Jesus did not die by blood loss before he got to the cross. Now, I know what a lot of you are going to say. Shouldn't he have just died of blood loss? There's a couple theories that present themselves. Like, for example, the Romans were very precise on where they struck you. So Jesus could have been very bloody, but he wasn't gouging blood per se. Like, it wasn't like a fountain. Like, he wasn't just pouring blood everywhere. But he was still, bloody nonetheless. Another theory is that if they did flog Jesus and he had some clothes on or some garments, it wouldn't have, bled as bad. Now, asphyxiation or suffocation, from what we can gather, from what we know from historical crucifixion, when someone was crucified, their arms were spread far from them and they were nailed, so they couldn't really, bring them back. So their chest or a lot of pressure was coming against their chest. So if they would lean out more to catch a breath of air, it would be extremely hard to do so. So, mind you, while Jesus is dying on the cross, he's bleeding out, his spine is exposed, and he can't breathe. Or he can breathe, but it was extremely hard for him to do so. Also, it's extremely possible that Jesus started hyperventilating, because you got to think, there's so much pressure that is pushing up against his chest and his lungs, it would have been very hard for him to breathe. And when it came to the positioning and the pain of the crucifixion, the design of what crucifixion was to make a man's every last moment, or from what he would endure, to make it very painful. Like when you were dying on a cross, right? And you pressed your chest outward to get more air because asphyxiation, or you were suffocating or just hyperventilating, it would put more pressure of the nails in your hands. That would put you in more pain. Mind you, if they had flogged you before you were crucified, your spine is exposed and it's brushing up against this hard wood. Also, another thing, dehydration. The conditions that you were put through when you were crucified, without fluids, your cells began to shut down, and dehydration alone made it hard for you to breathe, even though it was already hard for you to breathe. From what we know alone from the human body, it needs water for just basic cognitive functions and to just function properly. So without water and you're bleeding out on a cross, as you could assume, it gets much worse. Also, heart failure, stuff like suffocation, shock, stress, blood loss would lead to strain on the heart and eventually leading to cardiac failure. Hypovolemic shock caused the heart to be, or hypovolemic shock from being scourged and flogged caused the heart to beat faster with no fluid in circulation, or with very little fluid left for circulation. Oxygen was struggling to get to Jesus' heart. This would make it really hard for oxygen to be delivered to the heart. Now, the positioning of crucifixion would make it to where you obviously needed to breathe. So the heart would work overtime, and were it not knowing where to send the blood, it would send blood to starving organs. And also, from what we know, a fluid buildup most likely happened in Jesus' heart and lungs. We know this is very possible and very likely because in the Gospel of John, it says that when the Roman guards stabbed Jesus in the side to confirm his death, a mixture of blood and water spewed from his side. This is medically accurate. It's consistent with pericardial and pleural effusion. This means that Jesus' heart and lungs were already failing before they confirmed Jesus' death by stabbing him in the side. Now, when the time came and they needed to make sure that a victim of crucifixion, basically to confirm their death, they would usually take something and they would break their legs, but for some reason they didn't do this with Jesus, and instead they stabbed him in the side with a spear. And from a logical point of view, if you're dying on a cross and like you're very much in pain and they come up to you and they, stab you with a spear, chances are you're not going to be silent about it. Josephus, the Jewish historian, talked about how some of his acquaintances were crucified, but some of them were taken down early. And you gotta think, they weren't as medically advanced as we are, so they could do very little for them. So from what we can gather, they just died when they were taken off the cross. The only way you could possibly survive a crucifixion is if they took you down early, but from what we know, they didn't take Jesus down early. As a matter of fact, they stabbed him in the side to confirm his death. They fully intended to kill Jesus Christ. And even if someone hypothetically survived the crucifixion, they would have been crippled for life due to organ failure, blood loss, infection. From what we know historically, there is not one person that has ever survived a full Roman crucifixion, especially when it came to impalement or being flogged or scourged prior to their crucifixion. From what we know, crucifixion, the design of it was supposed to make you basically the death duration of a crucifixion lasted from a couple hours to a couple days. From what we know, Jesus Christ went out relatively quickly, or he was killed rather quickly compared to the other crucifixion victims. And from what we know, biblically, this is true. Because when Jesus was killed by crucifixion and Joseph of Arimathea, I'm probably saying that wrong, went to Pontius Pilate to ask for Jesus' body, Pontius Pilate responded by saying, "Really? Like he's already dead? Really, bro?" Even Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, was like, "He's already dead?" From what we can gather from this, we know that crucifixion was supposed to last for at least a couple days. Meaning, Jesus probably would have been on the crucifixion for days if he didn't die quicker. That's actually insane to think about, dude. They would have left him there for days. Like, that's actually crazy. They didn't just want to off Jesus. They wanted to make him suffer, which is so insane to think about, bro. Now, from what we can gather, the beam or the cross that Jesus carried to Golgotha, or the place of which he was crucified, weighed anywhere from 75 pounds to 125 pounds. Romans would have you carry these in the streets for public humiliation. Now, from what we know, the Roman guards were very cruel when it came to the victims. Like, for example, in scripture, they beat Jesus, they punched him in the face, they struck him with objects, they spit in his face. They also put a crown of thorns on Jesus' head to mock him. Also, they gambled to see who would get Jesus' clothes. From this detail, they were like, okay, he's not going to survive, so let's just gamble his clothes because he's not going to need them. They were gambling Jesus' clothes because they knew he wasn't going to survive. Now, from what we know, if someone was about to die from crucifixion as they were on the cross, there was a few signs you would usually get. One was like a loud shout and then they would die. Another is like shuddering or sudden collapse. From what we know, Jesus let out a loud shout and then he died. Also, sudden stillness was another sign. Now, from what we can gather, or from what we know, crucifixions would usually last days and night would come around, so temperatures would drop below freezing. This would give people hypothermia. And since crucifixion slowly caused the body to shut down completely, it made hypothermia very easy to get. Or at least from what we know medically. Infection is another thing, because you gotta think, when they had flogged Jesus or when they had scourged Jesus, From what we know about Roman floggings, it usually, depending on what area they were hitting, it would make it to where bone was exposed. So most likely, when Jesus was dying on the cross, his spine was exposed, because you gotta think, flogging they usually struck the back. So most likely, his spine was exposed, and you gotta think, he's on a cross, and all of that, or his exposed spine, is pushing up against this, like, wooden cross. From what we know, from the wounds that Jesus Christ had, it would have been incredibly easy for these wounds to get infected. And you gotta think, in the ancient world, or the first century, basically, of Jesus' time, infection, because you gotta think, they weren't as medically as advanced as we are now. So if you had infection, you were just going to die. There was no saving you. It would cause stuff like blood poisoning, fever, delirium. In some impossible scenario where Jesus Christ did not die by the crucifixion, infection most definitely would have killed him if the crucifixion didn't. And that's a big if he did survive the crucifixion, because from what we know, they made sure he was dead. And from what we can gather, or from what we know, Jewish law required burials to happen before sundown. And according to Jewish law, they had to make sure that Jesus was dead if they wanted to give him a burial. And you can be like, well, what if they tried resuscitation? What if they tried to resuscitate Jesus? You can throw resuscitation out of the window, because no one at the time believed that anybody could survive a crucifixion. So most likely they didn't even try to rescue or resuscitate Jesus, because they knew he was already dead. After a victim of crucifixion had died, they were usually wrapped into linen and they were put in a tomb. And a lot of people are like, well, what if they buried Jesus alive? Like, what if they put Jesus in the tomb and he wasn't actually dead? Like, what if he was still alive while he was in the tomb? Okay. From what we know about Roman crucifixion, and from what we can gather, if the crucifixion, right, did not kill Jesus, and that's a big if, because they made sure he was dead. Let's just say, in this imaginary scenario, Jesus Christ was still alive in the tomb. He would have died by a plethora of his other injuries: blood loss, infection, his organs shutting down, heart failure. Mind you, Jesus had most of these, and even if he was alive in the tomb, he was too weak to do anything. He would have died from those wounds. And this would have never got to a point, because they made sure Jesus was dead when they took a spear and they stabbed him in the side. Now, Joseph of Arimathea, if I'm even saying that right, I'm probably not, but he made sure, he literally made the tomb that Jesus was put in. Do you really think he would have put Jesus in the tomb if he knew that Jesus was alive? And you have to think, Romans were literally masters of death. The crucifixion and the way it was designed, like, it was designed to make your body slowly shut down completely. And even if you somehow survived the crucifixion or a crucifixion, you'd be crippled in some way, shape, or form. Your organs could not survive. They would shut down. Crucifixion would shut down or kill any reliable organs that you had. It was literally impossible to survive a crucifixion. Not only that, crucifixion was a message. If you mess over Caesar, this is going to happen to you. Or if you defy Caesar, that's going to happen to you. Some modern doctors have also given their take on crucifixion, and some of them agree that Jesus most definitely did not survive crucifixion. Cardiologists, if I'm even saying that right, agree that Jesus' heart most likely shut down, and due to his conditions and the way his body was shutting down, he did not survive this. A lot of doctors agree that crucifixion caused a lot of suffocating or asphyxiation, so a lot of cases or people that were crucified died by suffocation. A lot of pathologists note that the injuries that Jesus endured prior to his crucifixion would have made his death inevitable, because you got to think, before Jesus was crucified, he was scourged, he was beaten, a bunch of other stuff that I can't quite name out. Like, it made his death inevitable. And a lot of survival theories go against medical reality. Jesus 100% did not survive this. You gotta think, the physical pain wasn't it. They didn't just do that to you. There was psychological torture to it too. They would beat you, mock you, spit on you. You had to carry your cross to the place of which you were crucified. They usually did this in a crowd. So people, as you're struggling to carry this cross, people are gonna spit at you and humiliate you. Also, from what we know about historical Roman crucifixion, they didn't crucify people with their clothes on. So the depiction of where Jesus is on the cross and he's wearing like a loincloth and nothing else, this is very likely, or they just crucified Jesus plain naked. And you got to think about it from Jesus's perspective. Like, put yourself in Jesus's perspective, whatever, however you say it. Put yourself in his shoes, for example. You're in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? You're with your 12 disciples who you love so much, right? And then one of them sells you out for 30 pieces of silver. In today's currency, that's not even a month worth of groceries. And they take you, right? And none of your disciples stay with you. They all flee. They all abandon you, right? You're taken to a place, right? You have a trial at night, which under Jewish law was illegal. They can't even do that. It's illegal, which it's an illegal trial, and it is a unfair trial. So as they bring in false witnesses, right? They're just like being like, he's guilty. False evidence, false evidence, false evidence. And after, when you all think it's done, they rip your clothes, accuse you of blasphemy, guilty, which you didn't even commit. They beat you, they spit at you, they mock you, and just when you think it is finished. And they put you in front of a criminal who is guilty, by the way. You have a rigged trial, and everybody picks the criminal instead of you. And mind you, the guy that did all this, the Roman governor, he knows you're innocent, but he's not going to say anything because of the political pressure. So instead what he's going to do, instead what he's going to do is not say, yo, he's innocent. Instead what he's going to do, since he was pressured by the crowd, he is going to have you flogged. Each whip is much more painful than the last. They're tying you to a pole, whipping and slashing at your back. Every single flesh from the fiber of your back is being torn, and your bones are exposed from how many times they're hitting and slashing you. And just when you think it is all over, you are sentenced to be crucified, but that's not it. That's not it. They take you and they have you carry this heavy cross that weighs anywhere from 75 pounds to 125 pounds. And they have you carry it to the place of which you're crucified. But not only do they do this, they make you walk in front of a bunch of people that hate your guts and spit at you. And you take your cross, right? And you get to the place of which you're crucified. And not only that, they take long, like massive inch nails, and they're driving it through your flesh. You can't move. You know you are going to die. And just when you think it gets worse, it's a public speculation. Everybody is watching you get crucified. Literally everybody. You are now on the cross. You can't even breathe. Your exposed spine is pressing up against the wood. You can't do it anymore. And this is going to last anywhere from a couple hours to a couple of days. And that is what Jesus Christ experienced. Now, from what we know about historical Roman crucifixion, to confirm or to speed up someone's death while they were on the cross, they usually took something heavy and they broke their legs. From what we know about broken bones, especially if it's just shattered, is if it doesn't get treated, it can go gangrene and it can get infected, and this would lead to you have to cut it off. And you got to think, they weren't as medically as advanced as we were. So if you got gangrene, that was even more pain. From what we know, they didn't do this with Jesus. They speared him in the side to make sure that he was dead. A lot of scholars agree that Jesus lost 1/3 of his blood while going through the injuries that he did. Now, from what we can gather, right? Jesus, mind you, this is in theory. We don't know this for a fact. This is our best educated guess. He weighed anywhere from 130 pounds to 150 pounds. So if he lost 1/3 of his blood, that would be the equivalent of 3 Red Cross donation bags, which in retrospect, when you think about it, isn't really a lot of blood, but hey, when you're dying for the sins of humanity, it tends to be a lot of blood. Mind you, his blood loss and how much he weighed, this is all in theory. We don't know this for a fact. But if it was true, it makes sense why Jesus didn't immediately die of blood loss. Now, there are some theories or survival theories but all of them, like, go against medical reality. And you gotta think, the Gospels were very, like, detailed on how Jesus died and how he was tortured. And you gotta think, Romans weren't newbies when it came to this. They knew how to kill someone. And after they were done crucifying him, they made sure he was dead. They speared him in the side. So, Jesus, with everything we have discussed, 100% did not survive the crucifixion. In conclusion, Jesus Christ died 100% by crucifixion. Historical fact, he died 3 days later. He rose from the grave like a G, and we all know that he's the one true and only Son of God, and he's the son of the one true God, and he's just awesome and amazing. He beat up death, not literally, but he beat death. God is great. Like, comment, subscribe. I hope you're having an amazing day or night. We just hit 113,000 subscribers. God is great. Jesus is King and Lord, the King of Kings. Blah, 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 blah. God is great. Okay, thank you. Boom. Video over. Love you.